Well, so we're going to talk about Japan because there's actually good news to come out of Japan. So we'll end on a good news segment, shall we? But really, a lot of this is actually also relevant to the previous segments that we've had because, my goodness, if there was ever a warning to Japan for the society they don't want to fall into, it's what you've obviously presented previously here today. But as you can see here, so you have the Prime Minister, or former Prime Minister, I should say, to cut to the chase, Shigeru Ishiba, and he's just announced that he's going to resign just the other day. And you have this article back from July of this year, where it says that Ishiba walks a political tightrope on immigration, right? And obviously we, and mostly you, Josh, have covered extensively now. We've had many segments here at the Lotus Eaters covering what's going on in Japan and the civic resistance to what the government are basically trying to force on them. And it's because we identify with it. We see what the Japanese government is doing, and we know it well because it has been done to us, entirely without consent.
It's also interesting that all of this can be traced to a very specific date of November 2023, when there were negotiations between a number of NGOs about Japan's large national debt. And then mysteriously, one of the terms of their repayment is that they take in immigration. I remember this going very much under the radar at the time. So it's basically
That's very interesting that they would want to force that as part of the negotiations.
It's a weird thing for international capital to be pushing on people, isn't it?
Destroy your nationhood and economy to pay off your debts.
Also, I don't understand how it even helps their ability to pay their debts. Maybe they're, the most charitable example is that they buy into the false argument that importing people from these countries somehow helps the economy and helps it grow, and then...
Which it doesn't.
Yeah, it provably doesn't, and you'd think that these large, well-funded institutions would know that. So it seems a little bit more insidious than that, doesn't it?
You can also see those globalist institutions being set up in Japan using identical rhetoric all across the board because they have no attention to the particular character that makes Japan Japanese. It's just a one solution fits any country, and even though it's not a solution at all. And they obviously have no moral qualms whatsoever about reducing Japan and everything that makes it Japanese.
I find it very interesting that a lot of the pro-refugee or immigration messaging coming from people, whenever they're holding placards or signs, is written in English. Sort of indicates something, doesn't it? That perhaps it's not as organic as it's, presented.
Aye, very telling.
Listen, we know that we have got somewhat of a decent audience in Japan right now, so let's just all be as clear as possible. If you're watching this show in Japan, you've probably seen some of the other things that we report on. They should serve as a warning. If you choose to open your doors to mass immigration from the third world, whether it's for economic reasons or moral reasons, using arguments of refugees or the desire to pull up the global south to the level of more civilized and well-functioning countries, it will not go well. You will be in the same position that we are in now, except 20 years from now. You'll be in the same position that American cities are right now, in 50 years or so. Tokyo, as far as I'm aware, is one of the densest and largest cities in the entire world with a huge population, and as far as I'm aware, actually functions in ways that cities in the West don't anymore. You don't have huge ghettos that are completely unlivable except for the small minority ethnic groups that live there, that make it a complete no-go zone for anyone who isn't part of their tribe. You want to keep a hold of your culture, you want to keep a hold of your history, you do not want to be told that the Japanese don't really exist because you need to open your doors to everybody. What you need to do is you need to kick these NGOs out. You need to expel the people who are already in the country who are causing trouble. You need to keep yourselves insular, you need to keep yourselves Japanese, or else you are going to be in the same position that we're in right now, just 10 or 20 years down the line. You do not want that.
And the final stage is South Africanization, right? Where you have to, for your own safety, stay in walled areas with barbed wire electric fences, be armed at all times, and not go anywhere outside of your militarized compound without armed guards. This is starting to be the case in some American cities even, where that actually might be good advice. And it's starting to happen in Britain as well, to a certain extent. And this is the end goal of what's happening, that things will be so dangerous that you can't even go outside without armed guards. You can't have a house without massive fences around it.
So, to the voices telling you that tolerance is the path forward, those who telling you that multiculturalism is inevitable, repudiate these people entirely, because they don't have your best interests at heart. Do not give them an inch, because
they are lying to hurt you.
It's really that simple. It's really that simple. So let's talk a little bit about this article, shall we? So it goes on to say that in addition to a record-breaking tourism boom, 2024, so the year after what you were saying happened, Josh, in 23, saw Japan welcome nearly 360,000 new foreign residents. And while the... Pardon?
Where from does it mention?
Many, many places.
Well, they've recently had a partnership with Africa.
We'll get to it. Okay. We'll get to it. With the ruling Liberal Democratic Party contending with both economic considerations and political pressure from right-wing parties, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba faces a complex balancing act on immigration. And it goes on to say that in 2024, Japan's foreign resident population soared to over 3.7 million. Primarily spurred by an influx of young migrant workers and international students, and most importantly, and this is the most important statistic, the population data shows that 9.5% of the population aged 20 to 29 is foreign-born, right?
That's a disastrous statistic.
This is a terrible statistic, right? Because Japan obviously has a totally inverted pyramid. I understand that you have a very aged population, and that means that these people are going to be the future of your society. And what's more, I can promise you, and I'm not saying all, but generally speaking, these people are not loyal to you, right? They have sympathies from their place of origin, which is only natural as part of the human condition.
And it carries on from generation to generation.
So don't expose yourself to it. Nip it in the bud here and now, okay? So we also have to talk about the fact that this Ishiba, he is also, and this was remarkable, despite being a very, very small minority of Japan's population, he is actually also a Christian. And look, Christianity is, here in the West, is our cultural and spiritual inheritance, and I hold it in very high regard over here, but I do think that this is a mistake in Japan, because it will feed into the universality that comes with Christianity, and this idea of, you can see here, Ishiba talking at the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima, and talking about drumming for tolerance. Tolerance is a mistake, right? Tolerance, yes, in measure, tolerance is important in order to coexist with other foreign countries around the world, and in order to have negotiations and diplomacy with other nations. But tolerance within your own society is only going to go one way, until eventually it is you tolerating them on and on, further and further, until you find, hang on, I've given literally everything away about my identity, and we have nothing.
Well, tolerance is fundamentally only a virtue if it's applied to good people.
Yes.
Also, Christianity, you've got to consider that Christianity in Japan and the West isn't the same as Christianity in other places, especially in parts of Africa. Christianity in many of those countries is purely nominal, where they have the name Christianity and they'll have churches, but many of those people are still actually practicing old pagan voodoo habits. It's very strange to see how that works, but that is the case. So Christianity could be used in that sense as a Trojan horse to get you to accept these people.
In fact, the reason that you had 300 years of isolation is because you made the calculation that actually you would rather have your own country than be tolerant of European arrivals. Also, just to say, of course, it's remarkable, isn't it, with India, how they always seem to be pressuring other nations to take their people, right? In with
the main
deals.
Export from India is Indian people.
Yes.
Somehow.
And they like it that way.
And they've got an endless supply.
Indeed. And so you can see here, Japan and India arranging to agree on an exchange of over 500,000 people over the space of 5 years. A big mistake.
Because they're very antithetical cultures to one another. The Japanese, very orderly, very tidy. India, less so.
Less so is a diplomatic way to put it, Josh. Well played. And it goes on to say that one of the major topics will likely be expanding people-to-people exchanges, and Japan plans to accept 50,000 people from India. I note that's different to that number there. It doesn't exactly explain the difference. Is that per year? It doesn't say. You'll have to forgive me. But it expects that highly skilled personnel, particularly in science and engineering, will help promote Japan's economic growth and regional revitalization. It won't, but also what's more, as to this question of 50,000 people, I would just like to say, again, to the Japanese people listening, it doesn't actually really matter whether it's 500,000 or 50,000, because even if it is at the lower end of that scale, what you will still have is that, okay, you'll have 50,000 come in, and then they will make every effort to bring more of their people over, right? Doesn't matter how small the number is to begin with, they will feel that loyalty, that kinship with the other Indians, who I'm just taking as an example in this particular case, and what they will do is, as I say, continue to bring more and more over, because that's where the loyalties will lie.
It's sort of like Vanguard. Oh, sorry.
It opens the door, and one thing, and this is not unique to Indians. This is basically most other ethnic groups outside of the West. You'll find that they will have ethnic preferences that lead them to monopolize particular industries. In America, there's this huge monopoly of motels of Indians who came over, and they started to buy them up, and they would buy up properties and give them over to their family members and use them as a way to bring more family members over so they could hire them as part of it. In England, we have loads of corner shops that are owned by Indians. Same thing that you see in lots of foreign countries across all of Europe. They will find these small industries, and it may not be as intrusive as some other cultures, but these are still jobs and positions that should be done by industrious Japanese people, that should be done by people who are of your own, who otherwise may be having to do something else, or even, I don't know what the benefits are like on Japan, but they may have to go on government welfare if they're unable to do anything else. And also, again, this whole thing, Japan has been used in the West for a very, very long time as an example of economic stagnation. This is an argument that we always use. Well, if you don't go the way of the modern world, that being westernized, liberalized, open society, George Soros style, open borders, etc., you end up like Japan, which experiences economic stagnation, so that you have a graph with the GDP and it just stays relatively level. This being done in chasing economic growth, an infinite idea of endless economic growth, is again a Trojan horse. It is a poisoned chalice. If you try this, I'm sure many economists will rejoice, but on the ground conditions will deteriorate, and they deteriorate far more quickly than you ever expect them to. Quality of life will go down. The conditions of your cities will go down, but the government will find every excuse of economic means to justify it, even if you find that you're paying twice what you used to for everything.
Indeed. And so you have here, do you want to live in Japan forever? Tokyo is offering Indians residency option for less than 5,000 rupees, I assume that means. And so, again, we have this thing where if these people go over 50,000, they stay there for 10 years, and then they work through the loopholes, and especially, as I say, if these people are allowed to stay there, people in Japan who are listening, they will create the NGOs, they will create the legal courts in order to basically help people with this sort of thing, help them move over, help things. Yes, you were going to say, Josh?
I was just going to point out that 5,000 rupees is just 41.92 pounds. So that's what, about $50, $60 US dollars?
Bargain.
Samson's shaking his head.
It's not fair.
No, well, I quite agree. Anyway, So all of this news, and you can tell that things, even though, again, for many people in Japan, the situation on the ground in many places will not seem like it's shifted radically at this point, right? You've not got any Birmingham-style situations in Japan just yet.
They do have a problem with the Kurds, as far as
they do, and there's only 3,000 of them.
Yeah.
And they've still got a major problem with them in Tokyo. But as you can see here, Osaka protests are just the start of Japan's immigration backlash. And it goes on to talk about as well the fact that, look, unlike here in the West, in Britain and especially France, right, where it's kind of just in our nature to protest, right? There's always a protest going on somewhere about something. This is not really within the Japanese character, right? It really takes something to spark getting many, many people out on the street in unity to protest a situation. And so the fact that Japanese people are coming out in the streets and rallying against this shows even more so the level of genuine anger about this policy that is being pursued by the Liberal Democrat Party. And it goes on to say as well that the protesters' concerns appear on this occasion to have been misplaced, because you see what was happening was, and I'll come to this a bit more, there was a negotiation between Japan and some African nations about basically setting up some Japanese cities as homes for African nations to foster tolerance and all these sorts of things. And a terrible idea. And the Nigerian government seemed to put this out as something that had been agreed upon. Now, if I go to just scroll so you can see lots and lots of protests here, and good, I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see how fast the Japanese people are rallying and trying to nip this problem in the bud, trying to let it be known now, as opposed to, and all of this as well has increased, I will say, since a Vietnamese intern was arrested over a murder in Amari in the Saga prefecture just a few months ago. But this here had a lot to do with the reason that this message was being promoted about these African cities in Japan. Unfortunately, we can see Chong here, who I'm not really interested in reporting on, but you can see Elon, where he says, look, if this continues, there will be no Japan. Just some islands where Japanese people used to live. A country is its people, not its land. So I'm glad to see Elon leaning into the correct, both morally and factually correct ethno-nationalist rhetoric in this case, especially for a country like Japan, and moving away seemingly from his more sports team philosophy.
That's the interesting thing here. This is a complete contradiction from what he was saying at the end of last year, where he was putting America as a place that needed more people, specifically from Indian populations, through the H-1B visa scheme. Has he just entirely gone back on that, or is it just that he views America that differently to these more old world countries?
I think after what we've seen from Elon in these past few months, we will basically just have to sit and wait until he comes back to discussing this sort of thing with the particular of America.
Yeah.
We don't know how much his opinion has shifted, but we see what he says about England and Europe and those, yes.
I'd like to think that because he posts so frequently and, he has lots of obligations, that he almost certainly has someone helping him with his account. But that could not be true. It could just be that he's got a blind spot for America.
Yeah.
And he says, and so this is what was going around, right? This idea that Prime Minister Ishiba wants to import millions of Africans and Kurds to make Japan more tolerant, citing his Christian faith. Now, I will tell you, I looked for a long time this morning to find the truth of this, to find a source for this statement. I cannot find it. Right? It seems to be a mishmash of lots of different things put together. Yes, I can find a Shiba talking about the virtue of tolerance. Yes, I can find, as I presented, examples of him bringing in more Indians and having negotiations with Africans. I cannot find this exact statement. It may well be, I can't speak Japanese, unfortunately, and go through all of his speeches. But to some extent, it kind of doesn't matter whether he said it or not, for two reasons. One, this thing is being amplified a great deal now, and this has been going around Twitter a lot, and so whether he said it or not, this has become the narrative around him. And second of all, even if he didn't say this explicit thing, it isn't exactly in contradiction with the trajectory that the Japanese government have been pushing in anyway.
Well, the fact of the matter is that when you open the door slightly, it will be swung open. Right. So whether or not he has said this explicitly, if you carry on down the path that you're on, this will be the result.
Absolutely. And so we have here the Japanese Prime Minister announcing his resignation. Now, I'm not going to say that because there were a few protests that the Prime Minister decided to resign. In fact, I can't really find any evidence that this was uniquely linked to the immigration issue whatsoever. And I just want to be truthful about that. I don't want to present some narrative that sounds glorious but is in fact fictitious. I'd just rather be honest. But what we do seem to have here is the fact that his own party was basically going to push for a vote of confidence, basically, in him, and it was looking very unlikely that he was going to pass it. And so rather than fracture his own party, he's basically decided that he'll resign and he'll let them, because his party, the Liberal Democrat Party, is clinging on with every general election with fewer and fewer seats, and especially when you have the Sansito party that has been the far-right party in Japan that has, although has made small gains, they are swift and meaningful.
It's been very rapid.
It's been extremely rapid.
What was it, 2020, 2021?
Indeed, so in like 5 years, and now they have...
It's not even that much, it might be 2022.
So things are moving very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. And so even though he cites reasons of the trade agreement between Japan and America, and now that that's all been tied up, he feels that he can step aside in order to save his party. I would just say to Japanese people listening, try and keep the pressure up on the immigration issue. Do continue to protest, and do continue to remind your government that this issue is one of the most important in the long-term survival of your nation, right? Because this is a very, very long-term issue. You have to stay on this, and you have to stay on it hard, because they will be looking for every excuse to slip more and more immigrants just in through the back door, and they won't be open about it because they already know you hate it. They already know your answer, and that's why they'll do it in secrecy. So continue to be active, continue to be vocal, and hopefully push in whatever way you can. As someone who's not an expert on how you do things in political parties in Japan, but try and push to have a prime minister who is sympathetic to your concerns on the question of immigration.
Who are the men that pick for scraps amongst the ruins at the end of history? You should know, because you encounter them every day. Between the towering buildings of a fallen empire, we find the Fellahin, the historyless men, who know nothing of the turning of the cosmic wheel and find themselves outside of civilization itself. Cut loose from the great chain of being, they represent the loam into which our dying culture will return. That is, unless we choose to take up the burden once again. This Fellahin condition is the subject we explore in issue 4 of Islander magazine, on sale while stocks last and available worldwide at shop.lotuseaters.com.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.